The New York Jets 2024 season was nothing short of disappointment. Now they have a new young head coach in Aaron Glenn and things seem to be looking better. However, in this video, let's go ahead and do my mock off-season for the New York Jets. But if you guys do go on to enjoy the video, hit the like and subscribe button. We are on the road to 10,000 subscribers, so hit the subscribe button. If you're not subscribed, let's hop into it. So we are doing the mock off season for the New York Jets. In this video, we're going to be doing a couple of different things that the New York Jets are actually going to be doing in their off season. In the beginning, we're going to be managing their finances in the team assets portion of the video. Then we'll discuss some of the team's free agents and who we're going to let walk and who we're going to re-sign. Then we'll go over some positional needs this team needs to look to address. Then we'll do my mock free agency plan, and then we're going to do 2 3-round mock drafts to end the video off. But as I mentioned, we are going to begin with the team assets portion of the video. As of when I'm making this video via Over the Cap, they have approximately around $20.7 million in cap space, but for the sake of simplicity and for the sake of the video, we're just going to round down to about $20 million in cap space. To go along with the $20 million in cap space they already have open, they also do have 8 draft picks, which includes a first, second, and third. So fortunately, we don't have to worry about skipping a pick like they did last year without their second round pick. Now, when it comes to opening up a bit of space for this team, there's actually a couple things we can do. And I think it starts off by having the discussion about Aaron Rodgers and what his future is with this team. Now, later in the video, I'll be doing a more in-depth talk about the quarterback room and what their quarterback options are this year. But I do think one thing is clear: Aaron Rodgers is likely not going to be back, and personally, I don't think he should. While I thought his 2024 season wasn't horrific or wasn't horrible, I just think this team needs a bit of a culture reset, and I just don't think that Aaron Rodgers should be somebody who follows Aaron Glenn to the New York Jets. So with that said, if we were to cut Aaron Rodgers post June 1st, which by the way, there is a chance that that does happen, or there is even a chance he gets traded, or maybe he just retires outright. For the sake of the video though, to open up as much cap space as possible, if we were to cut him post June 1st, he would actually open up around $9.5 million in cap savings. Now, yes, there would be some dead money involved here, so I did take that into account, so just kind of keep that in mind. The next player, and obviously if you're going to get rid of Aaron Rodgers, you're probably not going to be able to keep Devontae Adams, and truth be told, I don't really think the team should be all that interested in bringing him back, especially when you hear the amount of money this team actually saves by post June 1st cutting him. If you cut him post June 1st, they're going to be gaining $36 million in open cap space. Now, for some transparency, that $36 million only really counts towards this year, and when it comes to 2026 and beyond, there will be a need to open up even more money for some of the massive contracts they're going to hand out. So just kind of keep that in mind. Now, when it comes to some extensions, this team has a number of players that are going to be up for extensions this year. Guys like Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, and even Sauce Gardner. But ultimately, I decided to hold off on Breece Hall just because I think waiting on Breece Hall is probably the most appropriate thing to do, just to kind of maximize your current rookie deal with him. Maybe give him a tender here and there. I don't know if he has a tender or not. I don't actually think he does, but if he does, give him that. If you can franchise tag him, maybe you do so. But I just don't think that you need to pay him right now, especially because he has shown the ability to play well while also showing the ability to have some injuries. But what I did want to do is I just wanted to lock up my 2 big name guys, both offensively and on the defensive side of things. So for starters, I want to bring back Sauce Gardner. I know he's coming off a bit of a disappointing season, but in some ways, I actually don't think that's a bad thing. Right now, his stock is at its lowest. And because it's at its lowest, there is a potential chance that you might be able to get him on somewhat of a cheaper deal than what he might be looking for if he has a really good season next year. While I'm not saying you're going to get him for super cheap, I'm also saying that potentially you could save a couple $1 million over what you might have had to pay if he had a really good season. But by extending Sauce Gardner, you're actually opening up around $3 million this year to work with. Again, that money doesn't translate to 2026 and beyond, but it does open up a little bit of extra cap space for the 2025 season. In terms of a contract that I would consider giving him, I'm thinking something similar to what like a AJ Terrell got. AJ Terrell signed a 4-year, $81 million contract. I don't know if that's exactly what he would sign, but I would assume it's going to be something north of $20 million a year. The next player I'm going to be re-signing for an extension is going to be Garrett Wilson. Now, similar to Sauce Gardner, it's only going to open up $2 million of cap space in 2025. Of course, we do have to take into consideration his massive contracts in 2026 and beyond. When it comes to what type of contract he's possibly going to be getting, I think he's going to get paid as potentially a top 8 wide receiver in the NFL. And I think a pretty good model to use would be like a Brandon Ayuk contract, who signed a 4-year, $120 million, around 30 million annually. I could see Garrett Wilson getting a pretty similar sized contract to him, barring injuries this year if he doesn't sign an extension. But if he were to sign an extension this offseason, because I do think he wants to get paid, I think it's going to be something similar to what Ayuk got. Now, to open up a bit more cap space as well, we're going to be restructuring the deal of Quinnen Williams, which is going to open up approximately $11.5 million. So to kind of recap everything that we did, we cut Devontae Adams and Aaron Rodgers post June 1st. By cutting both those players, we're opening up $36 million for Adams and $9.5 for Aaron Rodgers. We also extended Sauce Gardner and Garrett Wilson, which combined that together opens up $5 million to work with in 2025. And we went ahead and restructured the deal of Quinnen Williams, which opens up approximately $11.5 million. So by doing so, we went from $20 million to now around $82 million. Now, similar to some of the videos I've done in the past, because this team has so many massive contracts they're going to hand out, we can't go into free agency and have an extremely aggressive plan of going out there and signing the biggest name guys, because realistically speaking, that's just not possible. But the good news for this Jets team is because they're not paying a quarterback massive amounts of money, especially after they cut Aaron Rodgers, they do have a little bit of more flexibility to kind of work with things. But that then brings me to the team free agents portion of the video. This team does have a number of really high level veterans that they probably want to bring back, but ultimately I don't really know if I'm going to be bringing back a whole bunch of the big name guys. Some free agents that are on the board who I think are guys they should at least look to potentially bring back are guys like Hassan Reddick, DJ Reed, Javon Kinlaw, Tyler Conklin, Tyron Smith, Morgan Moses, Solomon Thomas, Isaiah Oliver, Jalen Mills, Chuck Clark, Jamian Sherwood, Tony Adams, Chaz Surratt, Ashton Davis, and much more. A lot of those guys probably aren't going to be re-signing with the team. I've actually heard that DJ Reed doesn't want to come back. I'm assuming that Hassan Reddick doesn't want to come back. Javon Kinlaw was okay this year, but I don't think he's going to be coming back either. So when it comes down to who I would personally prioritize of those batch of personal team free agents, for starters, I would bring back Tyler Conklin on a 2-year, $12 million deal. He's just a really solid tight end who doesn't really harm your team, but also doesn't necessarily boost your team that much. If there is a Tyler Warren available at my pick, I would definitely consider him over a guy like Tyler Conklin. But even if you do take a tight end in this year's draft, Conklin can be your really perfect tight end number 2 and really make for a nice tight end group. The next person I would also bring back would be Morgan Moses. Right now, they don't really have an answer for that right tackle position. And even though Moses isn't like the greatest player in the world, I do think that he brings you enough on the table to where you would want to bring him back. Last year, on over 723 offensive snaps, he only had 8 penalties and 2 sacks given up, which is really impressive. His PFF grades aren't the best, but they're definitely not bad per se. Like his overall grade is 63.3, his pass blocking grade of 69.2, and a run blocking grade of 60.6. He's also probably not going to cost you a whole bunch of money. I do think the Jets will have to pay a bit more than what he signed a few years ago. I think he was on a 3-year, $15 million deal a few years ago. I think he might require a bit more of a pay increase just because he is a bit of a veteran and this team is a little bit more desperate to keep a tackle like him. So I do think they're going to have to pay him a bit more, but I don't think it's going to necessarily take a long-term commitment to him. Again, your left tackle is Olu Fashanu, so you're probably feeling really good about that, but you got to kind of figure out your right tackle position. And I think by bringing back Morgan Moses on a 2-year, $18 million deal, that would kind of give you some clarity on that position. Again, it's not a long-term commitment, only a 2-year deal, so I think it makes a bunch of sense. The next player I'm bringing back is Jamian Sherwood on a 3-year, $18 million deal. Now, I was pretty impressed with Jamian Sherwood throughout the season. Obviously, CJ Mosley has been the guy for most of the season, but with some talks of him potentially retiring, as well as talks of lots of injuries kind of piling up on him, I do think there is some question marks with CJ Mosley, so I would like to bring back a younger player who's shown a lot of flashes. Via PFF, he has an overall grade of 73.8 with a run defense grade of 77.1 and a pass rush grade of 68.1 and a coverage grade of 66.2. Had over 109 solo tackles on only 1,063 snaps. Again, there's question marks over what's going to happen with CJ Mosley, so I think you have to lock in a nice contract to a guy like Jamian Sherwood. I based his contract actually on Quincy Williams, who's kind of coming off a similar sort of dilemma with the position of the linebacking group. Quincy Williams wasn't thought to be the guy, and then all of a sudden he panned out to be really good, so they gave him I think it was a 2-year, $12 million deal. This time I went with an extra year on his contract, but I do think Jamian Sherwood would be a really good pickup for this team to continue to have some continuity in that linebacking group. Then I brought back Solomon Thomas Thomas on a 1-year, $3 million deal. I don't necessarily think that this is a priority per se, but he is a good locker room guy who's just a rotational piece who can bring something here and there. Not particularly special, but I do think bringing him back should be somewhat of a priority. Then there's Tony Adams, who is a restricted free agent. I do believe that at some point this year, he actually got benched in favor of some other players, but I would at least consider bringing him back because for the most part, I think he's a pretty decent safety option for this team. He's still young, he's still developing, so there is going to be a bit of a learning curve with him. I'm not necessarily willing to give him a massive contract, but whatever his restricted free agent option is out there, I would probably match whatever deal he does get. I don't suspect it's going to be that high. If anything, probably maybe upwards of $5 million a year. But again, we're just going to match whatever the contract is. For the sake of the video, I'm just going to go ahead and count it as around $5 million because I don't actually know what his options are going to be in free agency. There is just no clarity on how much he'll get paid. And then lastly, I'm going to be bringing back Ashton Davis. Because we're not bringing back Chuck Clark in that strong safety room, we probably are going to need to find an upgrade in safety in the offseason. But with Ashton Davis, you are getting a veteran who showed some flashes in the little bit of playing time that he did get. I don't think it's going to cost a whole bunch to bring him back either. Probably only 2 years, $5 million. Again, last year, Chuck Clark just really struggled with a coverage grade of 45.1 and a run defense grade of 70.5, which is pretty good for a strong safety. But you got to be better in coverage. So I think by getting Ashton Davis, it at least gives you a body there. You could also even reconsider bringing back a guy like Isaiah Oliver if you think that he can potentially play a role on this team. But again, I do think this team is likely going to be looking at adding a safety in this year's draft, and I do think it's a pretty good safety draft class, so it does make some sense. So to kind of recap my team free agent portion of the video, I'm going to let a lot of these guys walk. Unfortunately, I would love to bring back DJ Reed, but he doesn't want to come back, so we're going to have to look to address the cornerback 2 position. But we brought back Tyler Conklin on a 2-year deal, Morgan Moses on a 2-year deal, Jamian Sherwood on a 3-year deal, Solomon Thomas on a 1-year deal, Tony Adams on a restricted free agent match type of deal, and then Ashton Davis for 2 years, $5 million. After doing all that, we went from $82 million to approximately around $55 million to work with. But that then brings us to the team needs portion of the video, and this team actually has a lot of good players and not a bunch of needs, but the issue is their needs are in like major positions that you have to have right, or else your team's not going to be good. For example, their biggest need is the quarterback room. Right now, Aaron Rodgers is technically their starter, but based off what I'm doing, he's not going to be the guy next year. So barring a trade or some free agency stuff or something in the draft, right now your starting quarterback is going to be either Tyrod Taylor or Jordan Travis. And while there are some Jordan Travis lovers out there, I don't think that he should be the starting quarterback for this team next year because I'm just not that much of a believer in Jordan Travis. I think he's a good college quarterback, but I don't know if his game's going to translate to the NFL level. I do like Tyrod Taylor, and honestly, truth be told, I kind of wouldn't mind if he's a starter to start the season off next year and just kind of see what he can do, but it doesn't necessarily inspire me as a team that's going all in if you do start Tyrod Taylor. The next position we're going to have to look to address is the wide receiver 2 position. Because we let Devontae Adams go, right now, technically, our wide receiver 2 is Allen Lazard or Malachi Corley or Xavier Gibson, and it's just not a very good group of guys. I do think Corley has some talent, but I don't think he should be your number 2 option. I do think he's fine as like a 4th or even 3rd option at best. So getting a wide receiver 2 is going to be an absolute priority for me. I do think that this team should look in the draft to address that because I do think there are some really good names out there for this team to potentially target. But if there is some targets in the free agency market, like potentially a Darius Slayton, if he wants to stay in New York, it could make some sense, but I don't think that's pretty realistic. Then I'm looking at the interior of the defensive line. Right now, their left defensive tackle next to Quinnen Williams is Javon Kinlaw, who we did not re-sign. So then you're looking at guys like Solomon Thomas to maybe fill in that position. Other guys like Leonard Taylor and Leki Fotu, who I believe is a free agent too, but I didn't bring him back. So we're going to need to look to address that other interior defensive lineman. If you can get a Mason Graham, who I don't think will be there with the 7th overall pick, but if you can get Mason Graham, that would be freaking awesome. I just don't think he's going to be there. Then I'm looking at the cornerback 2 position. Again, because DJ Reed isn't coming back, right now your corners look like Michael Carter, Brandon Echols, and then of course Sauce Gardner, unless you can find somebody else in that room. And while I do think there is some talent in this room with guys like Quantez Stingers as well, I just don't know if right now you can truly trust them to be full-time starters. So I do think looking at finding a running mate for Sauce Gardner needs to be a top priority. And then lastly, I'm looking at the edge rushing room as well as offensive line depth. When it comes to the edge rushing room, I just don't know what I'm going to be getting with Jermaine Johnson because he's just been really banged up to start off his career, especially with, of course, Hassan Reddick not working out. That position potentially could be a interest point for me. So that then brings us to my free agency plan, and with this team having around $55 million to work with and a number of positions they need to look to address, I think the most appropriate way to start out this conversation is by talking about what I'm going to do at quarterback. Now, let me just say this. I don't think there is a good option out there for the New York Jets, because if you go in the free agency market, you're looking at guys like Sam Darnold, who's not going to come back to the Jets, Mac Jones, Jacoby Brissett, Trey Lance, Justin Fields, Russell Wilson, and just a bunch of really not so inspiring names. Of those group of guys, the only names that I think could be a little bit fun to try out would be like Trey Lance and even maybe Justin Fields. When you look at the draft, though, they have the 7th overall pick, and unless they try to trade up to draft a quarterback, likely Shador and Cam Ward are not going to be on the board, barring a potential drop. And outside of those guys, I don't think there's another quarterback worth taking in the top 10 or even in the first round, because after that, you're looking at guys like Quinn Ewers, Jackson Dart, maybe Jalen Milroe becomes a conversation point. And the issue with taking a quarterback in this year's draft, if you are the New York Jets, is because you are a win-now team for the New York Jets, if you were to go out there and spend a 3rd or 4th round pick on one of those quarterbacks, let's just say Jalen Milroe or Quinn Ewers, who are quarterbacks that need time to develop, I don't think this Jets team has the time to let those guys develop, which in my opinion would be a disservice to your team for taking the pick and just wasting it on what is going to be a backup quarterback inevitably. And it's also a waste for the player's time as well, because the player is probably going to be looking to get some playing time somewhere else as they try to develop behind potentially a veteran. So for the New York Jets, the draft really doesn't make much sense for them to be aggressive and pursue a quarterback, especially when 2026 could hopefully be a better quarterback class. So I don't think the draft is really much of an option either, and outside of that, there are some trade names out there. Maybe Dak Prescott's name gets thrown around, but I don't think he's going to leave Dallas. Same with Geno Smith. I don't think he leaves either. And so really you're looking at, does JJ McCarthy potentially become available, which I don't think is going to happen either. So out of every single name that I threw out there, the only name for me that makes a ton of sense for this team would be either Trey Lance or Justin Fields. I think Justin Fields to me is a bit of a better player right now, so for the sake of the video, I'm going to be bringing in Justin Fields on a 1-year, $12 million deal. Now, Justin Fields, truth be told, I don't think is a great quarterback, but I think we saw a little bit of some stuff last year that maybe could inspire a little bit of hope within him. He looked a little bit more refined as a passer, and he still does have that athleticism, which I do think would make this offensive line a lot better. By bringing in a Justin Fields, essentially what you're doing is you're getting a guy who's going to be a 1-year starting rental type of guy. Truth be told, he'll probably compete with Tyrod Taylor for the starting job, and well, if Justin Fields wins the job, then great, you give him a year to sort of figure out if he can be the quarterback for this team, and if not, again, it's a 1-year deal, so it's not like you have a long-term commitment with him. I also do think that this would be a good locker room guy who would kind of help fix the culture for this team. I think he might be a fun fit with Aaron Glenn, and I do think with his rushing ability, it does give this team a little bit of an upside to be a better offense than what they were last year. If this defense does take the step forward that I do expect it to take, by getting a guy like Justin Fields, I think you're at least giving your team an opportunity to be somewhat good next year. And based off of everything that I've heard, every single player that plays with Justin Fields seems to love the guy. So by bringing him in on a 1-year deal, I don't think there is any sort of long-term commitment. I just think that he's probably the best option available for this team. You guys let me know in the comment section though what your thoughts are on the quarterback room, because I just don't really know if there's a good option out there outside of going with Tyrod Taylor next year or going after Justin Fields. But outside of Justin Fields, I think that I'm going to be looking for a wide receiver in the draft. So I think a lot of my money is going to go to the defensive side of things to try to shore up the defensive line as well as the cornerbacks. The first player I want to bring in is Mike Hughes on a 3-year, $30 million deal. Now, Mike Hughes, if you don't know, plays for the Atlanta Falcons and has been a pretty solid cornerback too for this team in 2024. Last year on PFF, he had an overall grade of 71.9 with a pass coverage grade of 71.4 and a run defense grade of 68.2. On over 700 snaps on the field, he only gave up 39 receptions and also did have 55 solo tackles. So this is a guy who is a certified cornerback too. He's not going to be compared to a guy like Sauce Gardner. He's just going to be, simply put, your second cornerback alongside what you already have in Sauce. You already feel pretty comfortable with your nickel back, of course, with Michael Carter. And then, of course, you do have Quantez Stiggers, who is developing, so maybe he could be a rotational piece in this cornerback room. But by bringing in Mike Hughes, I think you're getting a DJ Reed replacement. I don't think he's maybe as good as DJ Reed, but it's pretty hard to find somebody who's a better cornerback too than Reed. I still think that Mike Hughes is a really solid million player who would be a good fit with this team. Next up, I wanted to kind of just find a cheaper option who is a really good player to fill in that defensive interior position. So I went with Sebastian Joseph Day on a 2-year, $10 million deal. Now, currently with the Tennessee Titans, he actually has some pretty decent flexibility to play both edge if you need him to, if you want to be a really big defensive line, as well as also playing in the interior as well. The big thing for me is that this New York Jets team really needs to find somebody who's a really stout run stuffer. Quentin Williams could be more of your pass rushing guy, but by adding Sebastian Joseph Day, you're getting somebody who has a PFF overall grade of 70.3 with a run defense grade of 77.9. Now, his pass rushing grade is only 52.3, but he still did have 3 sacks last year, so you are getting somebody who can get to the quarterback, but obviously isn't like a high-level athlete when it comes to that sort of stuff. He doesn't cost a whole bunch. He could be a really nice rotational piece to add to this interior defensive line. I also do think that you could potentially still go in this year's draft to find an interior defensive lineman if there is a really good name available to be a part of that rotation, but I do think by adding Sebastian Joseph Day, you at least have a body that's really capable out there. Next up, I wanted to find a third option in the edge rushing room. I just need somebody who's extremely solid, but isn't necessarily going to take a whole lot of snaps away from my young players in Jermaine Johnson and Will McDonald. But I think there is a guy out there who's a really good fit, and it's going to be Michael Hoyt, I think you say his name, from the LA Rams. He's somebody who is just extremely solid and a little bit underrated in a lot of ways. On PFF, he has an overall grade of 61.3 with a pass rush grade of 60.3, but where this dude really shines is in run defense with a run defense grade of 73.5. Last year, he had 28 solo tackles, 24 assisted tackles, and 4 sacks. I also do think he has some position flexibility too, to not just play edge, but also play in the interior sometimes. The dude is 6'4" and over 300 pounds, so he isn't going to give you this high-level pass rush upside, but I do think he could be a part of a rotation in the edge rushing room who could really help this team when it comes to stuffing the run a whole bunch and honestly just doing a lot of the dirty work that you want to see from an edge rusher. Again, you have your young guys who you want to see develop and get a lot of playing time, but you also need a second body to go out there occasionally to just be a dude who can play ball, and I do think Michael could be the guy. Now, when it comes to other contracts out there, I think for the rest of the money, I would probably just focus on adding rotational depth options such as offensive linemen, edge rushers, maybe some backup safeties, and so on and so forth. But because I didn't want to waste a whole bunch of your time with just a whole bunch of boring names, I'm just going to assume that the New York Jets would spend the rest of their $23 million in open cap space on figuring out some rotational depth options. So again, to kind of recap my free agency plan, we brought in Justin Fields on a 1-year, $12 million deal. We brought in Mike Hughes on a 3-year, $30 million deal. We brought in Sebastian Joseph Day on a 2-year, $10 million deal. And lastly, we brought in Michael Hoyt on a 3-year, $15 million deal. Again, all of the rest of that money will go towards rotational depth options on either the offensive line, running back room, so on and so forth. Again, we went from $55 million now down to 23, but again, a lot of that 23 will just go to rotational bodies. With that all said, let's go ahead and begin my 2 3-round mock drafts. But as you can see, we are on the PFF mock draft simulator, and unfortunately, my top target in Tetairoa McMillan is no longer on the board, which is absolutely devastating for my plan here. Both the quarterbacks are also off the board. Mason Graham's off the board. Abdul Carter and Ted McMillan are off the board. I could go Will Johnson, but because we already signed a cornerback 2 in Mike Hughes, I don't think it makes a whole bunch of sense to bring in Will Johnson, which is unfortunate because Will Johnson is a hell of a player. Maybe we bring in Will Campbell to kind of fill in one of those guard positions, but I think they're pretty set with John Simpson and Elijah Vera Tucker. I'm even thinking about maybe even reaching on a guy like Tyler Warren, who I do think is worthy of a top 15 pick in this year's draft. I think this is extremely unfortunate with the way the board fell here. I could even go with Luther Burden, but I kind of think he does a lot of what you already kind of get with Garrett Wilson. I think in this situation, I might just take the weapon in Tyler Warren because I think that he could just be an all-around dominant tight end. Is he Brock Bowers? No. But I think he could be a really good piece on an offense, especially when a lot of the top players who I wanted to take are no longer on the board. So screw it. I'm going to go ahead and take Tyler Warren, who I think is a fantastic option for this team. I also think he's a really good team fit as well. Next up, I'm looking for a safety because we didn't pick up Malachi Starks last time, who I do think could have potentially been the pick there. But going out there and picking up a guy like Xavier Watts makes a bunch of sense. I even am a big fan of Nick Amanwaro, who I don't think is the 85th ranked player in this year's draft. I think he's a lot higher. I do like Andrew Makuba, but he's more of a 3rd round pick too. In this situation though, I am thinking about going with Xavier Watt. I am thinking about going with Xavier Watts. He has flexibility to play both deep and inside the box, has really good size, really good length, good speed. I'm going to go ahead and take Xavier Watts to kind of help in that safety room alongside what you already have in Tony Adams, Isaiah Oliver, and Ashton Davis. But I think now we need to look to address the wide receiving room because we didn't do so in the first few rounds. Nick Nash is interesting. I just think he's a little bit undersized. Nick Nash is interesting. 6'3", 195 was really productive this year, but I don't think I'm going to be personally taking him. I do like Jalen Noel, and I also do like Torrey Horton as well. Torrey Horton to me, unfortunately, had a bit of a down year this year because of some injuries and poor quarterback play. But prior to this, was thought to be a pretty consensus top, maybe first or second round pick in last year's draft. But this year, I do think that he's worthy of being taken in the third round and would be a really good piece alongside Garrett Wilson. All right, but this is my first 3-round mock draft. Let's go ahead and hop into the second one. All right, we are now in our second mock draft, and again, Ted McMillan is off the board. I think in a realistic situation, I don't think he's going to be a top 6 pick, so I do think he will be available 9 times out of 10, but for whatever reason, PFF just keeps having Ted McMillan go in front of me. It doesn't make sense. The team like the Patriots would be the only team that should consider him, but even them, they should probably take somebody else. But in this situation, I'm just going to go ahead and take Malachi Starks. I think he's the best blue chip prospect on the board who does fill in a positional need. Then after that, I'm going to be looking at adding a wide receiver, and I don't like Savion Williams as much as PFF does. I think he's a bit more of a project guy, and I just don't think that this Jets team can afford to take a project receiver right now. He does have very high upside, but I'm not going to personally take him. Xavier Restrepo is, to me, a permanent slot guy. Of the guys here, I love Jaden Higgins, 6'4", 215, really good security of really good hands, goes and attacks the football. Decent route runner, but needs to kind of work on a couple things here and there. I think he'd be a really nice fit along what you already have, and of course, Garrett Wilson. Then after that, I'm thinking about going with Elijah Arroyo to add to my tight end room. I'm a big fan of Elijah Arroyo, not so much as a run blocker or even a pass protector, but as somebody who has a decent frame, a little bit lighter, 6'4", 245, but could be a bit more of a receiving option in the tight end room. I do like that idea, but I also want to look at the interior defensive line as well. I don't really care for any of these names, especially in the third round. Maybe Shamar Turner you could talk me into, but I'm not as high on him. You could even look to potentially add some pieces in the offensive line like Donovan Jackson, who I do think makes some sense, can play tackle as well as also play guard. So maybe you go with a guy like Donovan Jackson. I think in this situation, though, I think I'm going to go ahead and take Elijah Arroyo as a receiving tight end option to really add some more weapons into this offense that has been needy of offense for some time. All right, but that then concludes my second of our 2 3-round mock drafts. But you guys let me know in the comment section below, what would you guys do with the New York Jets this year? Do you guys agree or disagree with my free agency plan as well as my mock drafts? But if you guys did enjoy the video, hit the like and subscribe button, and I love you guys. Peace.